We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Chesam and Beis and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 18b. On the previous summit, the Mishnah said that lo yatzak, if that oil that's poured in by a carbon mincha, if that's not done, so then the carbon is still kosher. And then the Mishnah also said lo bolal, which refers to the oil that's poured in after the dough is already placed in the vessel. They would pour in some more oil and mix that oil. It said lo bolal as well. If the oil is not mixed, that is also kosher. And on the previous summit, the Gemara asked, how can we say that lo yatzak is kosher? Isn't that something that is ma'akev? Rashi discussed why exactly it's ma'akev, what are the sources from the psukim, but in any case, isn't the pouring of the oil, isn't that ma'akev? And so the Gemara said actually what the Mishnah just meant was that if the Kohen didn't do the Yitzika, but rather a Zar, a non-Kohen did it, that is still kosher. But if the Yitzika, if the pouring of the oil was not done at all, that actually would be ma'akev, that actually would be required. But the Gemara said if that's the case, then bolal also, that must be the explanation. It means that if it was done by a Zar, so then it's kosher. But that would imply lo bolal at all, that if there was no oil mixed in at all, so then apparently it would be puzzle, it would be disqualified. And the Gemara continues now and asks, but how can that be true? But we learned in the Mishnah later on, Shishim nivlolin, 60 they can be mixed properly. Shishim v'yechad ein nivlolin, if you have 61, it is not mixed properly. V'havinon ban, we ask on that Mishnah, ki einam nivlolin mai have. Let's say it doesn't mix properly, what difference does it make? V'atnan, but we learned in our Mishnah, lo bol al kashera, that without mixing it's still kosher, so what does the Mishnah even mean? V'yamar Rabbi Zeir, and Rabbi Zeir said an explanation of the two Mishnayos, the following rule, kol haroi lebila, as long as it's able to be mixed, ein bila ma'keves bo. So the bila, the actual mixing of the oil, is not required. All that is required is that it is able to be mixed. V'chol she'eino roi lebila, but if it's not able to be mixed, so then bila ma'keves bo, then bila becomes something that is required. And the point over here is that clearly, according to Rabbi Zeir's understanding of the Mishnayos, as long as it's a roi lebila, that's all we care about. We don't actually require actual bila. We don't require actual mixing. It's not something that's required, and that would go against what we just said on the previous summit if we're interpreting our Mishnah as just referring to the fact that if it's done by a non-Kohen, it's kosher, so that would imply if it's not done at all, it is no good. And the Gemara says, Midi Irya, is it really true that you have to say that one is just like the other? In other words, lo yatzak means it's not poured, the oil is not poured by a Kohen, it's poured by a non-Kohen, because the Yitzika really is required. But hakadisa, but that is like it is, meaning by Yitzika, the interpretation of the Mishnah is lo yatzak Kohen, and by the part of the Mishnah that's talking about bolal, mixing, so there it means that if it's not mixed at all, it's going to be kosher. That's what it means. Hakadisa. Each line in the Mishnah is interpreted in its own context. Lo yatzak, when it says in the Mishnah lo yatzak, it means lo yatzak Kohen elazar. A Kohen didn't pour, rather a non-Kohen. And lo bolal, when it says lo bolal, it means lo bolal klal. Even if it's not mixed at all, it is kosher. And Rashi explains, V'atnan beperak hamenachos v'anesachim, but we learned in the Mishnah, in perak hamenachos v'anesachim, shishim esronim, these are measurements. 60 esronim, nivlolin belug echad, they can be mixed with one lug of oil. Shishim ve'echad ein nivlolin, 61 cannot be mixed belug echad with one lug. Hilkach lo yavi samech aleph esronim bekli echad. The point is, therefore, don't bring 61 esronim in one vessel if he she'ein rashoy lose sham shnei lugan, because you can't place there two lug, and that would be necessary for proper mixing. Uch Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, this all follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Diamar beperek shtei midos, he says later on in perek shtei midos, afilu lemincha shel shisha misaron ein lo elaluga, even for a mincha of shisha misaron, it's only going to have its lug. And Rashi continues and notes, v'li nira, it appears to me, da afilu l'rabbanan, even according to the rabbanan, da amri shishim lug, who say there are 60 lug, there's one lug for every saron, kimlu, but still it's established, ein nivlolim yafa b'kli echad, that is not going to mix properly in one vessel. And Rashi continues, Kol haroi labila, meaning shishim esronim, 60 saron, sheru'uyin livlal belug, which are able to be mixed with a lug. So as long as it's able to be mixed, ein bila ma'keves bo, the bila is not required. Shma mino dinami lo bolal kosher. We see from here again that even without mixing, it's kosher. V'she'ein roi labila, but if it's not fixed to be mixed, shishim ve'echad, meaning like 61, ma'akev bo mitzvahs bila, the mitzvah of bila then is a requirement to psula, and it is disqualified. And the point is, Alma, we see midashani law ein bila ma'keves bo, from the fact that it says ein bila ma'keves bo, shma mino lo bolal demasnis and lo bolal klal. We see that the words lo bolal in the Mishnah mean that it's not mixed at all. Mashma, that's how that should be understood. V'hu adin de lo yatzak. We should say the same in terms of the phrase lo yatzak. And again, then the Gemara said no. The phrase lo yatzak and the phrase lo bolal don't necessarily need to be referring to the same thing. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "O shepitata pitim merubos kasher." If he breaks the karban mincha up into large pieces, it's kosher. And the Gemara asks, "Hashta now lo pitas klal kasher." The Mishnah already said if he doesn't break it up at all, it's kosher. So pitin merubos miboy. If he breaks it into large pieces, is that even necessary to be taught? And the Gemara continues and answers, "My pitin merubos." What does the Mishnah mean when it says pitin merubos? Sheriba bepsisin. It means he increases how much he breaks it up, meaning they're very small pieces. And even in that situation, the Mishnah is saying kosher. Viba is saying, if you want, we could say liolam pitim and merubos mamish. The Mishnah actually means he's breaking it into large pieces. And so again, the question is, why does that even need to be taught? And the Gemara answers, umau detema. What might you have said? Hasamu deika toras chalos alein. When it's not broken at all, so at least it has the status of chalos. And maybe that's why it's kosher. Avalacha, but over here where it's broken into large pieces, the lo toras chalos ika, velo toras psisin ika, it doesn't have a status of chalos, and it doesn't have a status of broken pieces. So one might have thought that's actually more problematic. And so Kamash Malon, the Mishnah teaches us that that is still kosher. Rashi explains, Sheriba b'psisin, that's the first answer of the Gemara, means shepitata yoser midai, he breaks it up too much into very small pieces. That's what the Mishnah is teaching, that that's kosher. And then the Gemara gave a second answer. We are talking about pita merubos, they're large pieces. Umau detema hasam, and what might you have said over there? Kilo pitas klalu diksheira, maybe just when he doesn't break it up at all, it's kosher. Dika toras chalos alein, at least there it has the status of chalos. Aval pitas pita merubos ematipasel, one might have thought if it's broken up into large pieces that it's disqualified, and the Mishnah is teaching that it's kosher over there as well. And the Gemara continues, Lema masnisin delok Rabbi Shimon. Let us say that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Shimon. Rashi explains, masnisin demachshir yitzika bizar. Again, our Mishnah said that if a non-Kohen does the yitzika, that's the pouring of the oil, that's kosher. Delok Rabbi Shimon, that's not like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon would require that a Kohen do the yitzika. And the Gemara continues, Detanya, as we learned in the following brisa, Rabbi Shimon says, Kol Kohen sheino moda be'avoda, any Kohen that does not admit to the validity of the avoda, ein lo chelik b'kuhuna, he has no portion in the kuhuna. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Hamakra v'sdam hashlamim v'sachelev mibnei Aaron, lo siya shok hayomin lemana, the one who offers the dam hashlamim, the chelev from the sons of Aaron, to him he will get the right thigh as a gift. Moda be'avoda, if he admits to the validity of the avoda, yesh lo chelik b'kuhuna, he gets that portion in the kuhuna. She'eno moda be'avoda, if he doesn't admit to the validity of the avoda, ein lo chelik b'kuhuna, he doesn't get a portion in the kuhuna. V'ein li elazu bilvad, and I only know this, minayin l'rabos tesvav avodos. How do we know to include the 15 avodos, the following 15 avodos that all have to be done by a kohen? Hayitzikos, so yitzika here is clearly mentioned. Hayitzikos, v'hablilos, v'hapsisos, v'hamlichos, v'hatanufos, the pouring and the mixing of the oil and the breaking up into pieces of the mincha and the salting and the waving, v'hagashos, and the bringing close to the mizbeach, v'hakmitzos, and the taking of the fistful, v'haktaros, v'hamalikos, and the burnings and the pinching of the neck, v'hakabolos, and the receiving of the blood, v'hazos, and the sprinklings, v'ashkoas sota, and the giving to drink of the sota, v'arifas egla and egla arufa, v'taras mitzora, and the purification of mitzoru, and asiyas kapayim, and the lifting of the hands, the blessings of the kahuna, bein mibifnim, bein mibachutz, whether in or out of the Beis HaMikdash, minayin, from where do we know all of those require kahuna? Talmud lomer mibnei Aaron, it says mibnei Aaron, avoda hamisura levnei Aaron, the avoda that's given over to the sons of Aaron, kol kohen sheino moda ba, any kohen that doesn't admit to its validity, ein lo chelik b'kahuna, does not have a portion in the kahuna. And so here in this brisa, clearly the yitzika does need to be done by a kohen. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rav Nachman says, Lokash, it's not difficult, kan b'minchas kohanim, kan b'minchas Yisrael. Here we're talking about the mincha of kohanim, here the mincha of Yisrael. Minchas Yisrael, a karban mincha brought by Yisrael, devas kamitzahi, so there a fistful is taken, because only the komitz is burned on the mizbeach. So mikmitza va'elach mitzvahs kahuna, from the taking of the kamitza and onward, it's the mitzvah of the kahuna. Limed al yitziko v'lila shekshera bezarba. By the minchas Yisrael, it teaches that yitzika, the pouring of the oil, the mixing of the oil, is kosher with a non-kohen. Minchas kohanim, but when it comes to the mincha of kohanim, that's entirely burned. To lav bas kamitza, there is no kamitza there, there's no fistful. Meikara boy kahuna, from the very beginning, it requires kahuna. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rava said to him, Michti, let us see, Minchas Kohanim, Mehechus Rabbi Yitzika, from where do we even know that a Minchas Kohanim requires Yitzika, the pouring of the oil? Mi Minchas Yisrael, the source is from Minchas Yisrael. So we should say, Mahasam Ksheira Bizar, just like over there, the Yitzika is kosher with a zar, Af Hachanami Ksheira Bizar, so to over here we should say, it's kosher with a zar. And the Gemara continues, Ika Diamri, there are those that say another version of the above Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan benikmotzos, kan b'shein nikmotzos. Here we're talking where the kmitza is taken by karva mincha, where a kmitza is taken, so then the yitzika can be done by a non-kohen. But if it's a karva mincha where there is no kometz, so then the yitzika must be done by a kohen. Amar le Rava said to him, Michti, let us see, she'in nikmotzos mehecha israbi li yitzika. From where do we know that where the kometz is not taken, the yitzika is needed? Minik matzos is from the karbanos where there is a kmitza. So kinik matzos. So again, we should say it's just like those karbanos with kmitza. Mahasam ksheira bizar, afachanami ksheira bizar. Just like over there, it's kosher with a non-kohen. So too over here, it should be kosher with a non-kohen. Ella rather machvarti. You have to go back and say mas nisin to lo Rabbi Shimon. That our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Shimon. Again, Rabbi Shimon says yitzika, the kohen is required, but our Mishnah says a kohen is not required. And the Gemara continues and asks, my time of the Rabbanon, what's the reason of the Rabbanon that Yitzika is kosher with a non-Kohen? Amar Krutz, because the Pasuk says, V'yotzak olo Hashemin v'nosan ole levona, he pours the oil, he places the levona, v'heviel b'nei Aaron HaKohen, and it's brought to b'nei Aaron HaKohen, v'kamatz, and then the kmitza is taken. So mikmitza v'elach, from the kmitza and onward, mitzvahs kahuna, that's when it's a mitzvah of the kahuna. Limed al Yitzika uvlila, that teaches about Yitzika and blila sheksheira bizar, that's kosher with a zar. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon responds to that, B'nai Aaron. And Rashi explains, Minchas Yisrael, where do we know Yitzika from? It's from Minchas Yisrael. The Yitzika b'Minchas Yisrael ksiv. Yitzika is written by Minchas Yisrael. V'gamrinan mina shar Menachos. We learn from their other carbon minchas, beperek elu Menachos. That's in perek elu Menachos. The darshinan v'yatzakto l'Hashemin mincha l'rabos kol ha'Menachos l'kamitza v'Yitzika. We learn from that pasuk to include all carbon mincha for kamitza and Yitzika. And in the other version, kan b'shein nikmotzos, the answer of the Gemara was, here we're talking about carbon mincha with no kamitza. Hahi lishna ba'asr de Rav Nachman. This latter version of Rav Nachman, also l'Rebuye minchas nesachim. It comes to include minchas nesachim. That's the mincha with libations that accompany an animal carbon. The yitzika psula bizarre, to say that again yitzika is possible, would be disqualified with a non-kohen in that situation. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yotes Amud Aleph.